Hello and welcome to the podcast of the Prison Officers Association, the UK's largest professional union for prison, correctional and secure psychiatric workers with over 30,000 members. In this episode, we're going to look at why and how the union makes sure its voice is heard in Parliament and the importance of campaigning work in the political sphere. Later, we will be hearing from the POA's parliamentary researcher, Charlie Allen, on the work he does with the Justice Unions Group on issues of key importance to the POA, such as safety in prisons and the 68 is too late campaign, and how individual POA members can make a key difference in influencing MPs. But first, General Secretary Steve Gillen describes why the union needs to have a special fund for activity that is deemed political, how members contribute to that fund, and precisely what the money is spent on. The fund is called simply the Political Fund, and I started off by asking Steve what the Political Fund is and why it is necessary.
I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding of what political funds are about, and it's really about actually more anti-trade union legislation being thrust upon trade unions to justify their expenditure. So, for example, if a trade union now wishes to spend money on health and safety issues with all political parties, then we've got a situation where we've got to take that money out of the political fund, which in the POA's case is 15 pence per member, and individuals can opt out any time they want if they don't want to be a member of the political fund. But I would just want to reassure POA members that we're not affiliated to the Labour Party or any political party for that matter. I think there's a little bit of misinformation out there that people say, well, if you're in a political fund or you have a political fund, then you're funding the Labour Party. That's simply not true. We're not affiliated to Labour. We're not affiliated to any party. And that's the whole crux of the matter. But what the political fund does do, it enables the POA to fund such issues as if we want to promote issues such as health and safety in the workplace. We can do that with all political parties, but we've got to use that expenditure from our political fund, or campaigning with political parties on violence against our members. That's got to be paid out of the political fund as well. So the more people in the political fund gives us, the POA, and other unions for that matter, specific funds ring-fenced to do that sort of campaigning in Parliament.
And that's 15 pence a month?
It's 15 pence a month.
And I suppose the question is, what can you buy with 15 pence these days? The answer is, if there are lots of 15 pences there, it gives the union leverage and access. And it's not just political parties, as you said, Steve, is it? And it's not just what you or I might think of as political activity. There's a legal definition of what is political activity set down in the 1992 Trade Union Act. And that's the yardstick against all union activity is benchmarked. So if you want to do anything that's under that huge umbrella of activity that's set out in the Act, you've got to have a political fund.
Yeah, you have, because otherwise you're totally restricted on what you can and cannot do. And of course, in 2016, under the new Trade Union Act, which gave the certification officer more powers, is that, you could receive a complaint if somebody says, well, you've been using that money to fund, which should have been out of the political fund, but you haven't used the political fund for different things. And a certification officer with new powers now can actually sanction a trade union, fine a trade union, and have enforcement orders out in respect to that. Now, we've been pretty lucky because we've always justified our political fund. We don't force our members into it, but we tell them the benefits. As you've just rightly said, it is so wide now about what you can and cannot do with regards to particular funds. And it's all written down in the Trade Union Act of 92, which has now been redone in 2016, which makes it even more restrictive. So if somebody decides that they no longer wish to be in the political fund, the trade union's got a month in which to enact that. Otherwise, we're in breach of legislation.
But nevertheless, I think it's only fair to point out, isn't it, that despite all the things that we've discussed in the last 5 minutes, if an individual member doesn't want to pay the 15p political levy, it's their legal right to say, I want to opt out.
It is. And I haven't really got a problem with that, apart from it never used to be like this. So the reality is you could say that unless you actually wrote to your trade union to opt out, we took it that you were going to be in the political fund. But now you're even restricted on that. And that's all to have a pop at trade unions once again, to try and dictate what they can and cannot spend the money on. And by the way, trade union movement money is the cleanest money, I would say, in politics, quite frankly. Because let's face it, trade unions are involved in politics, and we might be party neutral, but you can't be politically neutral, because politics affects your members' lives, the families' lives, and that's why we should be active, and we'd encourage our members to opt in to the political fund so that we can use that money to benefit them. At the last count, it was roughly about 80% take up for the political fund, but it still means we're missing about 20% really of funding that we could do with, actually, to make things better for our members all round with some of the campaigns that we run on their behalf, and that we've got to use that political fund, whether it's dealing with charities, dealing with particular politicians, political parties, any campaign in the House of Commons or anything like that. So you are quite restricted, and we don't want to fall foul of the legislation. We can beat the legislation by demonstrating to our members how important having a political fund is. And of course, you've got to rerun those political funds every few years to get that mandate from your membership, which is an additional expense, once again, in running ballots, because the political fund, funny enough, is funded by the members for the members.
Indeed, it's every 10 years, I think the unions have to reballot to keep their political funds if they want to. So in a nutshell, in a world where we have the same legislative framework, but there was no political fund, we'd not only have our hands tied behind our backs, we'd have a gag in our mouth as well.
Yeah, I think that's right to say that. And by the way, it's entirely up to any individual union that wants to be affiliated to the Labour Party to do so, as long as their members are content with that. And it would appear to me that those that are affiliated through the political funds to the Labour Party, the members are satisfied with that. It's no different from the Tories getting funding from big business. I mean, do you get a say, really, if Tesco's or Sainsbury's or any big company that you shop in are giving donations to the Tory party? Because I don't get a say in it, but we do know that it happens. So as I said, trade union money is the cleanest money around. We're very careful with how the POA spend our members' money, because we know that they work damn hard to achieve that. I don't think 15 pence will make any difference to any individual, quite frankly, per month, but it might make a difference to the campaigns that we want to run. So I would sort of say, invest in that. Don't let the anti-trade union legislation beat you. Be a member of the political fund. And if you're not already so, it's easy to check with Cronin House membership department, and they'll tell you whether you would know anyway, because you're paying £15.60 a month, and 15 pence of that is ring-fenced. So if you're paying less than £15.60, you will know that you're not within the political fund. So I would certainly opt in if you're not already done so.
Thank you, Steve. Now, the POA's parliamentary researcher Charlie Allen reveals how the POA's voice and the union's priorities are promoted in Parliament itself, and the key role played by individual POA members, their families and friends. Charlie Allen, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of the POA podcast. I think most members probably won't know you. They probably won't know the work you do. So enlighten us.
Well, I act as the POA's parliamentary liaison, essentially. And I also do the secretariat or the admin for what's called the Justice Union's Parliamentary Group, which is a parliamentary group that cross-party MPs and peers, and it's co-sponsored by the POA along with NAPO, PCS, UCU, and the Police Federation of England and Wales.
Right. So I suppose it may be a surprise to some listeners to think that actually there are members from all parties in that parliamentary group, all parties.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, cross-party working in a way is one of the most effective ways of, I think, putting pressure on the government, because a lot of what we do is run campaigns or promote campaigns on behalf of POA and other justice unions. And most of the time, the ultimate objective is to put pressure on the government, essentially, to change a policy or even change a law, just make things a bit fairer and better for prison officers and workers throughout the criminal justice system. So yeah, we have great allies across the political spectrum, and I think that the group is stronger for that.
But your particular role must be part facilitator, part coordinator, part kind of putting the connections in place that enable the potential for cross-party consensus to apply pressure on government to actually do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to the strength of the argument behind the campaign. If you can explain why prison officers are upset or concerned about a particular issue, or probation officers or police officers or prison educators, court workers, whatever it is throughout the criminal justice system, if you can explain to MPs why this is important, why they should take notice, why they should care, and why they should help put pressure on the government. I think if you can win the argument, then it doesn't really matter whether it's on the left or on the right. To be honest, I think if the argument is prisons are too dangerous, too squalid, there's too little investment, I think there are very few MPs who would argue against that. Or if you say, for example, to give an example of a current campaign, another current campaign for the POA, it's about a royal commission on prisons and wider criminal justice system. That was actually a manifesto commitment from the Conservatives at the last election, hasn't yet been established. I think there are very few MPs across the political spectrum, right, left, in the House of Commons, House of Lords, very few parliamentarians who would be against that. So I think a lot of it comes down to showing that the union's concerns are fair, reasonable, just, and achievable. And then you might have to pitch it in a slightly different way if you're talking to a Conservative MP, or if you're talking to a Labour MP or a Scottish, national MP. You might spin it, I suppose, slightly differently. However, it is a common sense position that we're advancing, as the union, as the justice group, and as such, that's why you see, left and right joining hands. I mean, I can give you some examples. Obviously, one of the kind of key campaigns for POA at the moment is the 68 too late, the idea that prison officers no way should be pushed to work into their 60s to claim a full pension. I mean, we have a lot of MPs, of course, across the board who support that campaign and stand up regularly in Parliament and raise these concerns, put the ministers under pressure. But one of our key campaign allies in that is the MP for Sittingbourne and Sheppey, Gordon Henderson, who's a Conservative. He's got 3 prisons in his constituency, so obviously he gets a lot of correspondence from prison officers, from prison staff in general, but especially officers on this issue in particular. And he is constantly standing up for the union in Parliament, organising debates, interventions, writing to ministers, having a quiet word in the tea room or whatever. He's there constantly putting pressure on the government. And to be honest, I think, in a funny way, I think that a Conservative government with a big majority is more likely to listen, in a way, to a Conservative backbencher, be more concerned when a Conservative backbencher starts kind of going off message and saying, hey, there's a historic injustice here that has to be addressed. I think that's the kind of thing that a Conservative government is most concerned about, a Conservative backbencher who kind of sounds the alarm, won't give up, and is in danger of inspiring other Conservative MPs to also stand up and say, hold on, this isn't right, and then all you need is a couple of dozen Conservative MPs and you've got a full-on rebellion on your hands. So Conservative government does I think hopefully respond to a bit of pressure, and we'll see where things go in negotiations. But I would like to pay tribute to Gordon, and of course lots of other MPs. I should say that the Justice Union Parliamentary Group is co-chaired by Liz Saville-Roberts, who's the Plaid Cymru MP, Westminster leader, and Lord Ponsonby, who's a Labour peer, life peer. So it really is cross-party, but Gordon, for example, is a vice chair. So we have it really is cross-party working. It's not like we are pushing one particular party line. We're trying to get all the parties to push our line, which is essentially we need to reinvest in prisons. A huge amount of money was essentially robbed from the prison service during the austerity years, and you can't run prisons on the cheap. You can't run justice on the cheap, and it's time for the government to repay that money, properly invest in prisons, including and especially staffing, if you want to turn around, what many people call a escalating crisis in prisons.
Is a further barrier that the solutions, whilst everyone may be behind the cause, everyone can see the logic and the merit of the cause. 68 is too late. Proper investment in prisons, even a royal commission, a manifesto commitment, as you say, from the Conservative Party last time around. But do you think that sometimes the solutions are too difficult, and that's an extra barrier that the justice unions and their allies in Parliament need to overcome?
Well, if you listen to the ministers, to be honest, you might think that some of these things are beyond the control of government and state and whatnot, because they seem, without wishing to be cruel, they just seem sometimes to sort of throw up their hands and say, well, this is the way things are, and oh yes, it's a terrible shame that violence is out of control and people are having to leave for ill health and all sorts of things before they finish, having their careers cut short. I don't think it is complicated. I think a lot of it comes down to money. A lot of it, say you can't run prisons on the cheap. There are wider issues about prison policy that are probably more nuanced, and I think that there does need to be a sort of grown-up conversation, as they say, about what the purpose of prison is. And it is quite encouraging to see that particular issue being raised again across the House. A couple of Conservatives recently, MPs, earlier on this month, I think, were raising exactly that, saying, we need to have a conversation about what prison is for, what can we expect to happen there, who should we be locking up, who shouldn't we be locking up. We do need to have a wider conversation, and it's very encouraging to hear sort of senior Tories, not government, but people like Sir Bob Neill, who's chair of the Justice Select Committee, other backbenchers, Conservative, and of course on the Labour side, saying we need to, perhaps we're locking up too many people, perhaps we're locking up the wrong people. Even the Secretary of State himself, Alex Chalk, the new Justice Secretary, he's said in the past that prison should be for the people that we're legitimately afraid of, not the people that we're annoyed or angry with as society. And that's coming from someone who's now the Secretary of State. So I think if even if the top person in the government recognises that there is an issue, a problem, or at least a proper conversation to be had, then I think we should be having that. But it's a bit of a shame because we're not having that conversation. It doesn't seem like the government's pushing that. I think there is a general, especially in the Ministry of Justice, which is widely recognised as being one of the more dysfunctional departments in Whitehall, if you could put it like that. Well, that and the Home Office, I suppose, are sort of tying for. But it's generally seen as not working properly, and the stories that we've had, and of course it's only one-sided, but if you hear what people like Rory Stewart, the ex-prisons minister, is kind of coming out with now about his time as prisons minister, get a sort of flavour of how, and again, it's only one-sided, and I don't want to, knock the civil service or anything, but, it does seem that a lot of his, more, well, I mean, and again, it's not just, let's not put the blame, there squarely. Let's talk about the Treasury, and that so far as that a lot of these reforms will cost money. I mean, you can't really get away from that. And it is a lot of the time the Ministry of Justice, whether the ministers or the civil servants or whoever, would want more money, absolutely, and they are getting blocked by the Treasury.
It does illustrate that this is multi-layered, and that's not really helpful. That once you've got the justice unions lined up, you then get the parliamentary representatives lined up. You then try and get the ministerial team lined up, and you're still not over the finishing line. It must
incredibly
be. It must be. You must have the patience of a saint.
Well, things sometimes can move at a glacial pace, especially, ultimately, if you want to change a law, that can take years and years and years. Changing a policy, I suppose, is slightly easier. And, we have had some successes. For example, there were reports, credible reports coming to the union, that prison officers were being deducted, this is absurd, being deducted pay if they were assaulted and then had to take time off by going to hospital. Like that day, they would get like half a day's pay taken away from them unless they came back after going to the hospital. And this came up a few ways, but we brought it to the attention of MPs, and MPs asked questions about it in the comment. I think there were written questions actually, and the minister came back and said, "Oh no, absolutely not. You shouldn't be deducted any pay for not returning from hospital or whatever." And then the union were able to use that to stop this very sharp practice from occurring. So you can get like mini, successes. But yeah, the big successes, it can take a long time. It can sometimes needs to take a change in government, depending on what the issue is. Something like 68 too late is obviously a major concern across the political spectrum. I think the ministers themselves acknowledge that it's not sustainable. This idea that just because the union members rejected the offer back in, I think, 2016, rejected the Liz Truss. She was the Justice Secretary at the time, and it was rejected. They came up with an offer. I think it was basically state pension age -3 in effect, tied to other changes of terms and conditions. Membership rejected it, and then instead of sort of saying, "All right, fine, we didn't quite get it over the line there. Let's try again with a different number or different." The government, instead of doing that, instead of kind of in good faith continuing negotiations to say, let's come up with a deal that is acceptable for prison officers, they just walked away from the table. They just said, "Right, that's it. Negotiations over." And that's where we are now, 7 years later, with them essentially sort of stonewalling and saying, "No, we don't care. You should have taken that. We're punishing you now for not taking that. We're refusing to negotiate." Now, yeah, hopefully there will be some movement with the new people in the ministry. There are hopeful signs, but it's going to take, even then, once negotiations start, it's going to take a while to come up with a deal. So hopefully that kind of work will continue into the. But it takes years. It takes, as you say, it takes a long time.
I mean, I suppose it's a question of making sure all the ducks are in a row. Everyone is ready, so that if there is an opportunity or just a hint of an opportunity to make progress, I suppose it's like being a cash buyer for a flat or a house, isn't it? You just go bang, you're in there.
Something like that. Yeah. It feels a bit like kind of guerrilla warfare sometimes, the campaigning work that we do, that you're kind of constantly looking for an opportunity to, make our point, to get the POA's concerns, even just the kind of the voice of prison officers. I mean, the POA is essentially the democratic voice of prison officers, and as such, it's for a start, it's a voice that's very rarely heard. Obviously, in the last few weeks, there has been a bit of a spotlight on prisons and prison officers and the conditions, the working conditions, especially in jails. What with the escape and recapture
from Wandsworth.
From Wandsworth. Obviously, there's been more kind of public interest and political interest and media interest in prisons and working conditions and whatnot. And I think it's great. It's good that the union has basically used this sort of little window of public concern, as it were, to highlight just how bad things have got for frontline prison officers and the situation in our prisons. And so it's been encouraging to hear a lot of the sort of the lines that I know that the union has been pushing for years and years, and that we've been pushing in Parliament for years and years, suddenly getting a really quite a decent airing across the media and across the public. And I hope that people's interest in prisons doesn't sort of, and the media's interest doesn't sort of dwindle now. Part of what we do in Parliament is constantly put a spotlight on the working conditions. In a way, the essence of parliamentary campaigning, yes, it's to change the laws and to change policies and things like that, but it's also to sort of amplify campaigns and concerns and messages. Because if an MP stands up and says 68 is too late, obviously we'll say more than that, and we'll talk about the difficulties that the prison officers face and the dangerous conditions and whatnot. Just saying that, most members of the public, for example, don't have no idea that prison officers have to work in their 60s to get a full pension. And when you tell them, they're absolutely horrified. And so every time an MP will stand up and say, isn't it horrific that they have to work, unrealistic and cruel that they have to work to 68, then sometimes, quite often actually, the newspapers, the media, sometimes the local media from that MP's patch, or sometimes even national media, if the minister gives a particularly strange answer or something, or revealing answer, you'll get a bit of press, bit of media on it. And then that's another however many thousand people suddenly going, well, hold on a second, that's not fair. And then the essence is either through the union or just encouraging people to get more involved, lobbying their own MP, which I think is really important part of the democratic process. That way we can put pressure on MPs, and then they can put pressure on the government, and the media puts on the pressure. Other politicians, other parties do so. And that's how you change things, I think, essentially in Parliament. But yeah, it's a question of putting all your ducks in a row, building a kind of a core base of support in Parliament. That's what the Justice Union's parliamentary group is, essentially 120 or so MPs and peers who, are broadly sympathetic to the union's concerns, mobilizing them, establishing kind of clear campaign asks. You want to be clear, this is what we want the minister to do. And then coordinating that kind of pressure, whether that's everyone to put in for a particular debate or sign it's called an early day motion, or support an amendment to some related bill that's going through. Whatever it is, it's kind of guerrilla warfare. You're just constantly looking for these sort of campaign opportunities. And yeah, you could be cynical, but use opportunities, for example, with this jailbreak and recapture, thankfully. Use that to say, well, hold on a second, people are talking about this. We've got something relevant and important to add to that. And then kind of jumping in there, briefing the MPs with the freshest information, and then using the strength of argument. It's not like a kind of big lobbying operation, kind of corporate style where we all know about corporate lobbyists. This is not what we do at all. What we do is win parliamentary support through the strength of the argument, not fancy lunches or foreign trips, which I hear other kind of so-called campaigners do. Basically, what we're doing is we're trying to win support on the left, on the right, in government. We're trying to get ministers to support us, and a lot of them will privately, but then actually getting the Treasury or Number 10 to agree to do something, that's slightly more difficult.
Do you think as we enter the kind of twilight period of this Parliament, with a general election in a year, 15 months time, whatever, do you think more opportunities might present themselves, or actually are people just now winding down and just thinking?
No, I think it does actually present a tremendous opportunity, because in terms of like legislation or whatever, no hope, because we're coming to the end of the not that there's much hope of changing legislation, unfortunately. But okay, it's coming to the end, this Parliament, but there's a general election coming up. And as you say, it could be a year, could be 6 months, we don't know, but it's basically going to be pretty soon. And so Now's the time for the union to get all the parties on the record about the things that they would do if elected to help address the multiple crises that we're seeing across the criminal justice system, especially in prisons. So a lot of kind of the campaign focus now, and it will continue up until the manifestos, I suppose, come out, will be trying to make the case to Conservatives, to Labour, to the Lib Dems, to the SNP, to Plaid, to the Greens, to everybody, that essentially that prison officers need to be taken seriously. If you want the prison officers to vote for your party, then you're going to have to offer them something a bit better than what they've become used to. And it's a very straightforward kind of deal. It's like, if the party promises good things for prison officers, then prison officers are more likely to vote for them, essentially. So there is an opportunity. Now, okay, just because something appears in a party manifesto, we all know, doesn't mean that it will happen. Like, for example,
Royal Commission.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's still the first step. And then, you've got some kind of leverage after the election, whoever wins, to say, well, hold on, this was in your manifesto. Now, let's see what you're doing. And part of the idea is of a parliamentary liaison, I suppose. The deal is pretty basic. Whoever it is, if an MP or a member of the House of Lords stands up and says something useful for prison officers, like, hey, 68's too late, for example, then the union essentially will publicize that however it can, maybe on Twitter or through podcasts or whatever it is, through the Journal, will publicize that and let their members know that this is what this politician has said.
Yeah.
And that's fair enough. That's how democracy works in a sense. And also with the general election and the manifestos, I think there will be a tremendous focus. I mean, I remember the last general election, there was a focus on criminal justice. As I say, the Conservatives had this promise of a royal commission. They never did it, but it's worth asking why they bothered putting that in there in the first place. And I think part of the answer is they recognise that criminal justice is an issue that a lot of people are concerned about, and not just in a kind of knee-jerk hang 'em and flog 'em type way. I think even most Tory voters, MPs, don't believe that anymore. I think the Conservative Party has shifted to the centre of balance, as it were, is more about rehabilitation than just straight old punishment. So you will see some backbenchers standing up saying, "Oh, we need them smashing bricks more," or whatever. That will tire them out. You do see that still, but I think the kind of centre of gravity is much more in the kind of, well, let's try and use this opportunity to educate and rehabilitate and de-traumatize and decriminalize. That's what they want. That's what they say. However, the reality is, as I'm sure POA members know more than anyone, is that we've kind of got the opposite of that. We've actually got a lot of people coming out of prison more criminalized, more traumatized, more addicted to drugs. And that doesn't make any sense at all. So I think when even the Conservatives, remember the traditional party of law and order, if even they are saying, hey, we've got a problem, it's on our watch, I think that does present a tremendous opportunity for the union, for criminal justice workers, for anyone who cares about improving conditions. And there are charities, for example, that we may not agree with on everything, but there are certain issues that we can agree on. We want safe prisons for prison staff are safe prisons for prisoners as well. There's a general broad agreement that we should be improving the conditions in prisons. There's huge agreement. It's just we can't, as you say, get it over the line. Why do they still insisting that you can run prisons on the cheap? Let's see what the manifestos say over the next few months. Let's see what, for example, the new shadow justice team, what we've heard from them so far is very encouraging from a POA perspective, absolutely. Let's see how that translates into what appears in the manifesto. Let's see. It's everything to play for. And POA members can play their part. Anyone listening to this podcast, but non-POA members can play their part. Anyone who cares at all about prison justice, you can all play your part. Very simply, just get in touch with your local MP. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but honestly, from working with MPs, I can tell you, one person gets in touch with an MP they'll notice. Even if the assistant reads it, first of all, something relevant and important like prisons are, they'll hear about it. 5 constituents send an email to an MP, they will consider it a priority for them to address. If 10 constituents email their MP, basically the MP will clear their decks and fix it as best as they can. It doesn't take much. And they don't have to be 10 prison officers. That can be 1 prison officer and 5 family members and 5 friends. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't take much. It's much easier to lobby your MP and to get your MP involved, most MPs, than people think. And obviously be polite, try and be concise, don't go on and on. Be clear about what it is that you're asking. And honestly, it can have a huge effect. It's one of the things that has struck me most about working in this job is how accessible our democracy actually is to the general public compared to how inaccessible a lot of people think it is. A lot of people think, oh, Parliament, that's a different world for me. That's nothing to do with me. A third of the people third of the population don't vote in general elections, which is pretty depressing. But 2/3 of people do. If some of those 2/3 actually took it to the next step and say, well, hold on a second, my MP, whether I voted for them or not, is there to represent me in Parliament. So it's not a huge effort to write an email on a particular concern. And I would certainly encourage all POA members. I mean, I do say this a lot, but please just get in touch with your MP, be polite, be clear, be concise, and explain how bad things have got, because most MPs, they don't know this. A lot of them do. You might find that the MP saying, yeah, I'm working hard on this, or they might not get back to you, but then, tell your union, liaise with your local branch. There's a lot of things that we can do, but what we need really is the more MPs, just like how a union is formed, that, one prison officer can kind of be pushed around perhaps by management, but with a union or one worker, not, in general, workers individually are much weaker than collectively, that they can achieve quite a lot. I think the same actually applies to MPs. One MP on their own can have a bit of influence, maybe put a spotlight on something. But when you have 10, 20 MPs all working together, committed to a campaign, then you can really see change happening. So, yeah, talk to your MP, get them involved, get them to join the Justice Union's parliamentary group. So, yeah, get involved. It sounds silly, but, even a comment on Twitter can strike home, and a minister could see that and go, oh.
Charlie, thank you very much indeed for being so candid and helpful in terms of what POA members themselves can do to shape the change that they and the union want to see.
It's a great pleasure. And good luck with everything. And yeah, please, lobby your MP, follow the Justice Union's account, and get involved and talk to your branch officials as well. There's all sorts of things that POA members can do to shape the debate here, and I hope that they will.
My thanks to General Secretary Steve Gillen and the POA's parliamentary researcher Charlie Allen. You can find out who your local MP is and how to contact them by visiting the website They Work For You, all one word, theyworkforyou.com. The Justice Unions are on X, formerly Twitter, @JusticeUnions. For more information on the union's campaigning and parliamentary work, visit poauk.org.uk. On the union's website, there is also information on how to join the POA if you are not already a member. You can also follow the union on Facebook and X. Thank you for listening. We hope you like what you have heard and will join us for the next episode of the POA podcast. Until then, thank you and goodbye.